My parents funded my brother's lavish life, then expected me to pay his debts. He got private school, luxury vacations, and endless support, while I had to work 2 jobs just to survive. Now that he's drowning in debt, my parents decided it's my turn to help family. But I walked away instead, and now they're furious that their golden child has no one left to save him. Growing up, it was always clear to me that my brother, Ethan, was the golden child of the family. He had the charm, the intelligence, and the kind of natural confidence that made people gravitate toward him. My parents, especially my mom, adored him. They treated him like he was destined for greatness, a future CEO, a world changer, the one who would make our family name proud. Then there was me, Nathan. I wasn't stupid, but I wasn't what my parents called gifted either. If Ethan was the prodigy, I was the workhorse, the one who had to put in twice the effort for half the recognition. My grades were decent, but they didn't come effortlessly like his. I had to grind for every A, while Ethan could sleep through class and still ace every test. And because of that, my achievements were met with nothing more than, "Good job, Nathan." Now, did you hear? Ethan won another academic competition. From a young age, our roles were set in stone. Ethan was the one who would go places, and I was the one who would just have to work hard. That was my parents' way of saying, "You're on your own." They never said it outright, but their actions made it clear. All their money, time, and energy went into Ethan. When he needed tutoring, they hired the best. When he wanted to take up an expensive hobby, no problem. When he said he wanted to go to a prestigious private school, they made it happen. Me? If I needed help with school, I had to figure it out on my own. If I wanted something, I had to earn it. I remember once asking for a new laptop for school. My parents told me, "If you really need it, get a job and save up for it." But when Ethan wanted the latest MacBook, it showed up on his desk the next week. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me, that it was just how things were. But deep down, I knew Ethan was being set up for success, while I was expected to survive on my own. When high school ended, Ethan got into a top-tier private university. It was the kind of school with ivy-covered buildings and alumni who ended up on Forbes' richest lists. The tuition? Insane. But my parents didn't blink. They paid for his tuition, his rent, his food, everything. In their eyes, this was an investment. They believed that Ethan would be so successful that he'd pay them back tenfold in the future. Meanwhile, I had a different reality. I wasn't even given the option of choosing a fancy school. I had to go to a public college nearby because that's what we could afford. But let's be honest, it's not what we could afford. It's what I could afford. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition. I studied at night, took freelance gigs, and hustled to make ends meet. While Ethan was out networking with future millionaires and partying in high-rise apartments, I was grinding through night shifts and learning how to stretch a dollar. Looking back, I can't say I regret my path. Sure, it was tough, but it taught me something Ethan never had to learn: self-reliance. I learned how to budget, how to handle money wisely, and how to live with less. Ethan, on the other hand, never had to think about those things. He grew up believing that money would always be there, that success would come easily, and that if he ever fell, someone would be there to catch him. I didn't have that safety net. I knew that if I messed up, there was no backup plan. And maybe that's why I pushed myself harder. Because I had to. But what I didn't realize then was that one day, those same lessons would make all the difference. After college, I hit the ground running. I wasn't chasing a dream job or some grand vision of success, I just wanted stability. I landed a job in tech. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid decently, and I knew that was my ticket to something better. While my coworkers upgraded their cars, moved into fancy apartments, and took trips to Europe, I stuck to my plan. I rented a small place in a not-so-great part of town, drove an old but reliable car, and packed my lunch every single day. Every paycheck, I followed the same routine. I maxed out my 401k, put money into an IRA, and invested in a mix of stocks and index funds. I learned to live on less than half my income. It wasn't always easy. There were times when I wanted to splurge to give myself a break. But I kept reminding myself of the bigger picture. If I could build enough wealth early, I wouldn't have to work forever. Meanwhile, Ethan was living a completely different reality. He landed a high-paying job right out of college, something my parents were thrilled about. They saw it as confirmation that all their sacrifices for him had paid off. And for a while, it seemed like he was on his way to fulfilling the future they always imagined for him. But then the cracks started to show. Ethan never stayed in one place for long. He switched jobs constantly, always convinced that the next opportunity would finally be the one that matched his potential. He'd land a great role, start strong, then after a few months he'd start complaining about how the company didn't appreciate him, how his boss was holding him back, how he was meant for something bigger. Then he'd quit, confident he'd find something better in no time. The money was good, but his spending was even better. He rented high-rise apartments with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, filled his closet with designer suits, and always had the latest tech gadgets. His Instagram was a highlight reel of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and front-row seats at concerts. He wasn't just spending money, he was spending future money, running up credit card debt like it was nothing. At one point he decided to start his own business. My parents were ecstatic, convinced that this was finally his big break. He threw himself into it, promising that within a year, he'd be running a multi-million-dollar company. But the reality was different. The expenses piled up fast: office space, employees, marketing costs. He made some big flashy moves but never focused on the basics. Within a year the whole thing collapsed. Vendors went unpaid, his employees left, and the debt started suffocating him. My parents, of course, were there to catch him. They covered his rent when he was behind, gave him money to get back on his feet, and reassured him that one setback didn't define him. They still believed he was destined for greatness, that he just needed a little more time, a little more help. I watched it all unfold from a distance. It wasn't my business, and honestly I was too focused on my own goals to worry about it. I was steadily growing my savings, getting closer to financial freedom with each passing year. While Ethan was chasing status and burning through money, I was making sacrifices. I didn't need a fancy apartment, a brand new car, or lavish vacations. I was playing the long game. And I was winning. By the time I turned 35, I had done what most people only dream about. I reached the point where I didn't need to work anymore. My investments had grown enough that I could live comfortably without a paycheck. I wasn't rich by any extravagant standard, but I had built a life where I had freedom. No more stress, no more office politics, no more answering emails at midnight. Just time. Time to live on my terms. It was surreal. For over a decade, I had been focused on this goal, sacrificing along the way, watching my savings grow while resisting the urge to spend like everyone else around me. And now I had done it. I had the option to walk away from work forever and do whatever I wanted with my life. Naturally, I wanted to share the news with my family. I expected them to be proud, or at the very least happy for me. When I told them, Ethan gave me a half-hearted congratulations, but my parents, their reaction was off. They smiled politely, but there was something behind their eyes that I couldn't quite place. The enthusiasm I expected never came. They changed the subject quickly, like my news was just a minor detail, not a major life milestone. I figured maybe they just needed time to process it. But then the comments started. Subtle at first. You know, not everyone has the same opportunities to save. Life isn't always fair. Some people just have a harder time. Families should support each other through tough times. First, I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed a pattern. Every conversation led back to Ethan. They started talking about how hard things had been for him, how stressed he was, how he was too smart for the job market, and how companies just didn't appreciate his talents. How it wasn't his fault that his business failed, that he was just unlucky. Then one night my mom finally said it outright. Over dinner she sighed and told me that Ethan was really struggling with debt. He was having trouble sleeping at night, constantly worrying about money. She told me how hard it was for them to see him like this, and then, the real reason for all these conversations finally came out. You've done so well for yourself, and Ethan just needs a little help to get back on his feet. She didn't ask outright, but the implication was crystal clear. They wanted me to step in and save him. I gave the safest answer I could. I'll think about it. I didn't want to start a fight, but I also wasn't about to hand over a pile of cash just because Ethan never learned to be responsible. That should have been the end of it, but instead it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, my parents started pushing harder. The hints became less subtle. How's it fair that one child gets to retire young while the other is still struggling? If one family member succeeds, we all succeed. It's not right to turn your back on your own blood. You've been so lucky, but luck runs out. Someday you might need help too. They didn't see my years of hard work, my sacrifices, my discipline. They only saw a big pot of money they believed should be shared. The more they talked, the more it stung. This thing I had worked for, they didn't see it as an accomplishment. They saw it as an opportunity to bail Ethan out. My financial success wasn't something to celebrate. To them, it was just another family resource that should be distributed. Then came the guilt tripping. My dad called me one night, and instead of making another subtle suggestion, he just said it outright. We raised you. We put food on the table for you. We sacrificed so much for you. And now when we need you to step up for the family, you're being selfish. I was stunned. They weren't asking anymore, they were demanding. In their eyes I owed them. I had spent years dreaming of financial freedom, of breaking free from the cycle of working just to survive. But now I was being told that all of it was meaningless if I wasn't willing to hand it over to my brother. And for the first time I started to wonder, was I actually being selfish? I spent days thinking about that conversation with my dad, replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was I really selfish for not wanting to give up what I had worked for? Was I supposed to feel guilty for wanting to enjoy the life I built for myself? But the more I thought about it, the clearer things became. This wasn't about fairness. It was about entitlement. Ethan had made his choices. He had lived recklessly, jumping from job to job, chasing status, and spending money like it would never run out. He chose to ignore budgeting, savings, and long-term planning. And now that he was in a financial hole, my parents expected me to dig him out of it. When I didn't immediately offer up my savings, their frustration turned into full-blown pressure. My mom started bringing it up every time we spoke, making her disappointment more obvious. I just don't understand how you can sit by and watch your own brother suffer. My dad took a more aggressive approach, calling me cold and ungrateful. And Ethan? He barely spoke to me. He wasn't even trying to justify himself. He just expected that I would step in and fix everything. He knew that if he stayed silent, my parents would fight his battle for him. Then things got worse. One night, my dad called again. His tone was different, more serious, more final. We can't keep helping Ethan, he said. We've already done what we can, but we have our own debts and this is too much. You need to step up. I almost laughed. They couldn't afford to keep bailing him out, so now it was my responsibility? I calmly told him that I wasn't going to give Ethan money. I said I'd be willing to help him figure out a budget, maybe even guide him on how to get back on track, but I wasn't handing over my savings. The silence on the other end of the call was heavy. Then my dad sighed. I really hoped you'd be better than this. And with that they cut me off. They didn't disown me outright, but they stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped reaching out. My mom, who used to check in on me at least once a week, suddenly acted like I didn't exist. My dad, who had always been the more emotionally distant one, went even further, like I was just some stranger who had let them down. At first I thought that was the end of it. I figured they were mad, and after some time, they'd come around. But I underestimated how far they were willing to go. It started when my cousin showed up at my place unexpectedly. He was someone I barely saw, but he acted like he just wanted to catch up. We made small talk for a while before he brought up Ethan's struggles. He's really going through a tough time, he said. I just don't get how you can sit back and watch while your brother suffers. That's when I realized what was happening. My parents were spreading their version of the story to the whole family. They had told everyone that Ethan had never been given the same opportunities as me, that they had sacrificed so much for me, and now, when they needed just a little help, I had turned my back on them. I started getting text messages from relatives, some I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me that family should always come first. That I should help my brother out, just for a little while. That I was being selfish, greedy, ungrateful. The worst part? Ethan had joined in. He had been telling people that he had always taken care of me, that he had supported me growing up, and now when the roles were reversed I had abandoned him. He knew it wasn't true. He knew I had never taken a dime from him. He knew that I had worked for everything I had. But instead of owning up to his mistakes, he played the victim. The guilt-tripping, the manipulation, the lies, it was like they had all joined forces to pressure me into giving in. And the more I resisted, the worse it got. I was cast as the villain of the family. Not because I had done anything wrong. Not because I had hurt anyone. But because I refused to be their personal bank. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. I had spent weeks ignoring the phone calls, the guilt-tripping messages, and the whispers behind my back. But it wasn't going away. My parents weren't backing down. And Ethan certainly wasn't going to stop playing the victim. I knew that if I didn't confront them directly, they would never stop trying to break me down. So I decided to face them. I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. The moment I walked in, I knew they thought I was there to give in. My mom had that familiar hopeful look, and my dad sat back in his chair like he had already won. And Ethan? He just smirked like he knew how this would play out. I didn't let them speak first. I laid it all out. I told them I knew what they had been saying about me, that they had twisted the story, painting themselves as struggling, selfless parents who had only ever tried to help me, while I had turned into some greedy monster. I called out their manipulation, the lies, the pressure tactics. You didn't raise me to be independent because you wanted me to succeed, I said. You raised me to be independent so that one day you could treat me like an investment. You never cared about how hard I worked or what I sacrificed. You only cared about whether I'd be willing to share the payoff. My mom's face fell. My dad sat in silence, and for the first time Ethan actually looked uncomfortable. Then my mom started crying. She went on about how they had given everything for me, how they had never meant to make me feel this way, how she only wanted our family to be close. And Ethan? He threw in his usual nonsense, how I was the lucky one, how I had always been the hard-headed one, how he had always believed in me, and was just asking for a little support. It was all so predictable. I looked at them, and for the first time I saw them for exactly who they were. Not parents who wanted the best for me. Not a brother who cared about me. Just people who wanted something from me. So I made it simple. I'm not giving you a dime. The room went silent. I don't care how much you beg, or how many relatives you turn against me, or how many guilt trips you throw my way. I have spent my whole life watching you put Ethan first, watching you bend over backward to make sure he never had to struggle, while I was left to figure things out on my own. And now, because you can't carry him anymore, you expect me to? No. I'm done. I could see the shift. The hope turned to anger. My mom's crying stopped. My dad's face hardened. And Ethan? He muttered something under his breath, something about how he'd always known I was a selfish bastard. That was it. I turned around and walked out of the house. I didn't look back. I blocked their numbers. I ignored the relatives who kept calling to talk some sense into me. I let them tell whatever story they wanted because at the end of the day I was free. For the first time in my life I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, their guilt, their demands. I had fought too hard to build the life I wanted, and I wasn't going to waste a second of it on people who only saw me as a source of money. So I moved on, and I never regretted it. It's been a while since I walked out of that house, and not once have I looked back with regret. Cutting them off wasn't easy. It's never easy to sever ties with people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But I realized something that day. Love without respect isn't love at all. My parents and Ethan didn't respect me. They didn't see me as a person with my own dreams, my own struggles, or my own right to enjoy the life I built. They saw me as a resource, something to be used when it was convenient for them. And once I accepted that, it was clear that walking away was the only choice that made sense. First there was silence. No calls, no texts, nothing. Then came the final guilt-tripping messages. The last desperate attempts to make me feel like I had betrayed them. My mom sent one last message saying she would pray for me and hoped I would one day see how much they had sacrificed. My dad simply wrote, "You'll regret this." Ethan? He didn't even bother. I guess in his mind, I had never really existed outside of what I could do for him. And honestly, that was fine with me. I had spent years of my life trying to prove something, to work harder, to be enough, to earn their approval. But I never needed it. The only person I ever needed to prove anything to was myself. With them out of my life, everything changed. My wife and I finally had the peace we had been craving. We traveled, we explored, we spent time doing things that made us happy. Without the stress of family manipulation hanging over me, I could truly enjoy the freedom I had worked so hard for. We went on road trips with no itinerary, waking up in small towns just to see what they had to offer. We took long hikes, cooked meals together, and simply existed without the weight of other people's expectations. Financial freedom wasn't just about the numbers, it was about having control over my own life. No more pressure to be the responsible one. No more guilt for living life on my own terms. No more handing over my happiness just to make other people comfortable. And the most valuable lesson I learned? Boundaries are everything. It doesn't matter if someone is family. If they disrespect you, use you, manipulate you, or expect you to sacrifice yourself for them, then they don't deserve a place in your life. It took me 35 years to learn that. And I'm never forgetting it again.